Welcome to episode 76 of Think Big with Michael Zellner. All positive, no politics. My guest today for the second time is award-winning national college basketball columnist for CBSSports.com, Gary Parrish. Gary is also a host, sideline reporter, and a studio analyst for the CBS Sports Network, and he hosts the Gary Parrish Show, which is the highest-rated drive time afternoon show in Memphis on 92.9 ESPN Radio every Monday through Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. He also co-hosts his own podcast, CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball. He's joining me again today to preview the Memphis Tigers and then get some of Gary's thoughts and predictions for the rest of the 2022-23 college basketball season. Gary, thanks for coming back on today.
You kidding me? It's my pleasure. As you're going through the list of things that I do, it is a reminder that my life is about to get super busy. It's a lot of jobs for one person to have, but I'm obviously fortunate to have them.
Absolutely. You know, Gary, just a couple of months after it was announced during the 2022 NCAA tournament of what at the time sounded like the hammer was about to come down on the Memphis program. You know, the number one transfer in the portal, Kendrick Davis, signed with Memphis. Were you surprised at all that he chose Memphis at that time because of what many thought was going to happen with the program?
No. I've said this many times, like if I were Kendrick Davis or if I were Kendrick Davis's father, advisor, I would have been careful about picking a school that was, you know, in the process of possibly being severely punished with an IARP case. And that's certainly where Memphis was at the time. We now know that the punishment is basically nothing. Everything's fine. Memphis is going to be eligible for the 2023 NCAA tournament. Penny Hardaway will serve no suspension whatsoever. But at the time Kendrick committed to Memphis, all of this stuff was still very much up in the air. In fact, if you were to talk to most people in college athletics, they would have told you that they think Penny Hardaway will definitely be punished in some way and that Memphis might be banned from the 2023 NCAA tournament. And that's something that I would have considered. But I was told fairly early in the process that Kendrick was comfortable taking whatever risk he was taking. There were, you know, connections to him that were, you know, within the Memphis, athletic department on the Memphis basketball staff. And then obviously Penny Hardaway has proven to be, really from the moment he got the job, a high level, recruiter of talent. You know, Penny Hardaway is not like most college basketball coaches. He's older than I think maybe people realize, but he doesn't look it. He doesn't act it. He's super famous. He can, I made this point before. Listen, there is a lot of great college basketball coaches in the country, but I don't know that any of them can relate to young people as well as Penny Hardaway can relate to young people. Like Bill Self is tremendous, but you know, he's not listening to the new Lil Baby album when it comes out like his players are. I don't think. Maybe Bill would surprise me. But Penny is. Like Penny, you know, he listens to all the same things. He talks about all the same things, and he's very relatable to a lot of prospective student athletes. And he has been able to capitalize on that. And so when you throw all that in a pot and mix it up, I wasn't surprised that Kendrick Davis picked Memphis. I think most people knew that he was almost certainly going to pick Memphis. The truth is these days, college players with legitimate NBA potential care way more about getting to the league than they do about competing for conference championships or even going to the Final Four. That's always been a little strange to me, but I noticed it a while ago on the grassroots circuit when you would talk to, you know, high school elite level prospects. They would almost never talk about, yeah, it's my dream to go to the Final Four, or it's my dream to play on Big Monday, or it's my dream to, you know, play in a CBS triple header on a Saturday afternoon. Their dream is to get to the NBA, and Penny Hardaway has that NBA background. They run that program with the emphasis on getting you to the next level. And so that's all stuff that was appealing to Kendrick Davis, and it's appealing to a lot of people.
You know, Memphis just recently played an exhibition game against CBU where they looked, you know, very unmotivated out there. And Penny Hardaway said, quote, "We just got outplayed in our building," unquote. What was your take from that game?
I don't pay too much attention to exhibitions, if only because, coaches are not, most coaches are not, and Penny, I think, falls in this category, are not trying, the number one thing you're trying to accomplish is not to win the game. You don't want to lose the game, but your priority is not winning the game. If it were, you'd be running plays more often than you are. You'd be calling timeouts when another team goes on a run. You'd be locked into certain rotations and lineup combinations, as opposed to just throwing a lot of different things out there and seeing what works and what doesn't. Very good teams in my adult life have lost exhibition games to Division II schools, Division III schools, and AIA schools, and then gone on to, be a top 15, top 10 team in the country, compete for national championships. So the fact that Memphis struggled, I don't think is notable in any way. I think that because, like you said, like Penny suggested, they weren't motivated by it, and they didn't prioritize winning as much as they, it was just a 40-minute game in a mostly empty arena on a Sunday afternoon. It is what it is. It serves the purpose that it serves. The only thing I would take away from it is that you can just, you don't have to be a college basketball analyst to know that if you look at this roster, it is almost entirely filled, at least with the players who matter, entirely filled with guys who have played multiple seasons of college basketball at the Division I level. These aren't high school prospects that you're wondering how is their skill set going to translate to college basketball. These are all guys who've played college basketball for the most part. And the one thing that stands out more than anything else is that they don't have shooting. Kendrick Davis is a good, but not great 3-point shooter. Shot around 37% last season at SMU. That's good. It's not great, but it is good. That's rock. If you could have a whole team shooting 37%, you would take it. But for your best shooter to be at 37%, that's not bad, but it's not great. And the bad thing is everybody else is a subpar 3-point shooter, except for Jaden Hardaway. And he, he's only played, like last season, I think 10 minutes per game. So how meaningful is that? So you've got a roster filled with guys who have proven to be either good but not great shooters or subpar shooters at the Division I level. And if you watch that exhibition or just look at the box score from that exhibition between Memphis and Christian Brothers, one of the things you notice is that Memphis was like 2 of 19 from 3-point range. This is not going to be a great shooting team. Now, the good news in college basketball is that you can be a high-level basketball team without being a great 3-point shooting team. But it does make everything harder. It puts more pressure on you to be locked in defensively every game, because they're going to have to win some games in the 60s and maybe some games in the 50s. And God forbid, but it wouldn't shock me if they get into a situation where they're trying to win one in the 40s, even though they probably will play fast and have a lot of high possession games. They've got a fabulous college basketball player in Kendrick Davis, another really good one in DeAndre Williams, but shooting is clearly the Achilles for this team. And, I could sit here and tell you, things about, well, if this guy can improve and this guy can improve, then maybe it won't be as bad as it seems like it'll be on paper. But I would imagine we're looking up in February, and I think both these things can be true. We'll say, hey, Memphis is a good basketball team. They're probably going to make the NCAA tournament, but boy, they do not shoot it well from the perimeter. That's what the data seems to suggest.
Outside of Kendrick Davis, because, we've seen obviously what he can do on the court. We had to face him in SMU. What kind of impact are you expecting from the other 5 transfers this season?
Well, the impact will vary. Kendrick obviously being the biggest, the biggest piece and the most proven piece. Like, what he is. He's the reigning American Athletic Conference Player of the Year. He's a consensus second team preseason All-American. He isn't a great NBA prospect, but he is a great college basketball player. And for our purposes, that's what Memphis needs him to be, a great college basketball player. And he has a established record of being that. Outside of that, I don't know that any of the transfers are undeniably going to be great. You've got guys who scored at a lower level, but at a lower level for bad teams. And coaches are pretty split on this. Like every time Memphis adds one of these transfers from a league that frankly I don't watch that often, like Demaria Franklin from Illinois Chicago or Keontae Kennedy from UTEP, I reach out to coaches who work in that league because they've coached against them, they've scouted them, game plan for them. And sometimes you'll talk to a coach and he'll say, oh yeah, that guy's really good. They had nothing around him at this place, so the team struggled, but like that guy's going to be impactful at a place like Memphis. He's going to help them win. And other times I'll get a response back that says something like, come on, GP, he's an inefficient scorer for a terrible team. How is that guy going to help Memphis win? And the transfers that Penny has enrolled outside of Kendrick Davis are largely guys who were productive for bad teams at a lower level. Now, I remember talking about this exact same thing with Texas last year. It was Chris Beard gets the job first year at Texas, and he loaded up on the transfer portal. And he had I think enrolled 5 double-digit scorers who played at different schools in the previous year. And one of the things I noted, and others did as well, is that, okay, clearly they've got talent. And to be clear, the transfers Texas enrolled last season are broadly speaking, better than the transfers that Memphis enrolled this season. But the common thread between them would have been guys that produced for teams that didn't win. What does that mean? And I was never skeptical of Texas because I had them preseason top 10. But if you were to ask me if Texas doesn't live up to expectations, why would that be? And it would be because they got a bunch of guys who have never really won anything. And now are they going to be able to come together and win something? Now, Texas ended up being good last season. They finished 15th at KenPom. They, won a game in the NCAA tournament, went to the round of 32. They got a 6 seed in the bracket, but they weren't great. And I don't know that the reason they weren't great is because those guys just were, people who had produced at a lower level, but for bad teams, and it didn't come together the way you'd hope. But that's certainly one explanation. And they also had some chemistry problems in the season because there was a lot of new guys. One guy, one of the more heralded transfers, quit the team midseason. So they ran into some of that stuff. But still, Texas was good. And I think Memphis will be similar. Maybe not top 25 good, but certainly preseason top 40-ish good. And obviously, if the Tigers live up to those expectations, they're going to need more than Kendrick Davis to be impactful. Kendrick and DeAndre Williams, having that as your top 2, that's a really good place to start, especially at the American Athletic Conference level. But they're going to need, some other guys, whether it's Keontae Kennedy or if he gets eligible, Demaria Franklin, they're going to need other guys to be impactful in ways that might run counter to their reputations as they enroll at Memphis.
You mentioned DeAndre Williams. I mean, Memphis was really lucky that, he decided to return the season, and Alex Lomax, changed his mind and decided to come back too. How important was it for Penny to get those guys to come back with their leadership?
Well, for DeAndre, it's incredibly important. I mean, again, he's a flawed NBA prospect. And, people, I think, are aware he's very old relative to other college basketball players. He's either 26 or about to turn 26. And, so will he ever play in the NBA? I doubt it. 26-year-old with a bad back, I doubt it. But, maybe I wouldn't rule it out, but I bet against it. But that doesn't mean he can't be a great college player. And he is great, may be overstating it, but he's a really good, incredibly important, winning college basketball player. If you look at the record of games where he's played and hasn't played since he enrolled at Memphis, it's like night and day. When he plays, they're good. When he doesn't, they're not. And if you go look at what has happened to his previous school since he left, when he was there, they were okay. And since he left, it's been terrible. So he impacts winning in a variety of ways. And you can't overstate the importance of getting him back. The truth is, he didn't have a better place to go. That's why he's back. These guys, and there's a lot of them throughout college basketball. DeAndre is probably one of the lesser known examples of this, given that the more famous examples are Drew Timme at Gonzaga and Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky and Armando Bacot at North Carolina and Hunter Dickinson at Michigan and Trace Jackson Davis at Indiana. Those are all American level players, player of the year candidates. DeAndre Williams isn't quite that, but the thing they all have in common is they are great college players or really good college players with nowhere to go or no better place to go. Because of the way basketball is played in the NBA now, traditional bigs just have, I don't want to say no value, but it's almost like being a running back in football. Everybody's going to need one on the roster, but nobody wants to spend a top 10 pick on one, or very rarely does anybody want to spend a top 10 pick on one, or in some cases, Oscar Tshiebwe had one of the all-time great college basketball seasons last season. If he would have entered the draft, he would not have been a first-round pick, because what he does well at the collegiate level is awesome for college basketball. Doesn't matter in the NBA anymore, because at that level, unless, and this hasn't always been the case, but it is now, unless you can guard in space effectively, rim run, and as a bonus shoot jumpers from the perimeter, you're not a elite front court prospect from an NBA draft perspective. Because if you can't guard ball screens and guard in, they'll put you in ball screens every possession, and they'll get you switched onto a little guard, and then you'll just get cooked over and over again. It's why Steven Adams couldn't play against the Timberwolves last season in the playoffs. He's the Grizzlies starting center. He's a very important player, but when they could drag him out to the perimeter with Karl Anthony Towns and then just put him in a ball screen and get him isolated on a little guy, he can't handle himself in that situation. So they had to sit him down. So DeAndre Williams is, he's not a traditional center, obviously, but my point is he's a flawed NBA prospect for a lot of different reasons. And college basketball exists in a place now where name, image, and likeness rights are available, and you can make real money. So I think this is great for Memphis, but also great for college basketball. You've got these familiar faces back in school who 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago would have said, hey, I've already been the national player of the year. I know I'm probably not going to be picked in the first round, but it's just time for me I've done everything I can do in college. It's time to just get on with it and go make money playing basketball. Well, now the most money Oscar Tshiebwe can make playing basketball is at Kentucky. The most money, Armando Bacot can make playing basketball is at North Carolina. And similarly, the most money DeAndre Williams can make playing basketball right now is at Memphis. So that's the main reason he's back. And it's that's a big boost for Memphis. Without him, I'd have them projected as a non-NCAA tournament team. With him, I think they make the field for the second straight year. With Alex Lomax, I'm a little conflicted on it. I've said this often. I hope when Alex Lomax graduates and exits college basketball and, presumably someday starts to raise a family, I hope they move it next door to me. I hope my kids can be raised around his kids. He's an impressive young man and seems like a rock solid guy. Like if my three boys grow up to be as impressive as Alex Lomax, I'll be pleased with myself. Period, new paragraph. I don't love him as a college basketball player. Not at the Memphis level in the role that he has been used since he literally enrolled at the University of Memphis. He's been on a team. This is just my opinion, but I could show you a lot of numbers to back it up. I don't think he's ever been the best point guard on any Memphis team he's ever been on, but he's been the primary point guard on every Memphis team he's ever been on. And I do think he's useful if he were a 10-minute a game backup point guard and nothing more. But what history tells us is that Penny wants him on the court more than that. And what history tells us is that though there are some some good moments. And yes, leadership is something worth, that's worth something. And the pressure he can put on the ball is worth something, but he's so limited offensively. He's a non-shooter. He's really a non-finisher when he gets into the lane because he's so small that he has trouble finishing in traffic against bigs. And though he has a reputation in some circles as a great run your team point guard, he's, with all due respect, that's not what the numbers show at all. Like, he gives it away just as often as he's, going to record an assist, or at least the numbers are very similar. And sometimes they lean toward the bad side more than the good. So, that's a guy who is, I think, useful when at this level, when used in what I would deem a proper role. But my fear, to the extent of fear, that's a bad word to use, but my concern would be that, and certainly this is the way the exhibition went, Penny Hardaway is going to try to use Kendrick Davis and Alex Lomax a lot together. And then Kendrick Davis becomes, a guy playing off the ball as opposed to on the ball, because Alex Lomax can't really effectively play off the ball. And you start to get Kendrick Davis into a role that is not the role he used to become the reigning American Athletic Conference Player of the Year. I don't love that. I'm happy to keep an open mind about it and see how it goes, but there's a pretty large sample size right now of what Alex Lomax is as a 20 to 25 minute per game, primary point guard. And, it's not great. And I worry that might be a thing again this season. But again, I know it might sound like I wish he weren't on the team. That's not true. He is worthy of a scholarship and being, in the rotation for this Memphis basketball team. I would just rather it be closer to 10 minutes a game as Kendrick Davis's backup, as opposed to 24 minutes a game as Kendrick Davis's sidekick.
Do you expect any of the freshmen coming in this year, or, Jonathan Lawson, the redshirt freshman, to have any kind of impact in playing time?
Well, to me, he's the biggest X factor, because he's the one guy we haven't seen. He's the one guy who could matter, who we haven't seen at this level. And what you would hope is that after sitting out a year, the development, getting stronger, all of that stuff, allows him to exceed whatever expectations most fans have for him right now. Because I think, again, that's the problem with having a roster almost entirely built with guys who have played at the division level. You kind of know what they are. Whereas Jonathan Lawson, you can daydream a little bit and go, well, we haven't seen him in 2 years. What does it look like? And so if you told me Jonathan Lawson could be a top 5 player on this team, I would immediately raise the expectations on Memphis based on that alone. I think the best case for Memphis is that Jonathan Lawson is a meaningful player, but until we see it, you just don't know. And I would be lying to you if I tried to make some broad, prediction about what he's going to be. We haven't seen him since high school. We're not in those practices very often. But to me, that's one of the biggest storylines heading into the season. What does he look like? Because, he's the biggest unknown. Everybody else on that roster who's going to matter is somebody we've seen play college basketball within the past year, or at least you can look at the stats. Maybe you hadn't seen them play. You still can Google or YouTube their highlights and Google their stats. Jonathan is a little bit of a blank slate. I hope he's impactful. They need him to be, especially once Emmanuel Acott decommitted and went to Western Kentucky. That opened up another backcourt spot. That's, if you think Emmanuel Acott was going to play like 28 minutes a game, that's 28 minutes a game somebody else has got to play. And Jonathan Lawson, if you told me he could play those minutes effectively, that'd be ideal.
So you said your expectations that you think that Memphis will make the NCAA tournament this year, which means they'll obviously win 20 plus games. Do you see them, getting further this year, or do you see it maybe they're 8 to 10 seed, 12th seed, and, just maybe get out in the first round? They have the possibility of doing better?
Yeah, well, of course. Teams every single year overachieve, and teams every single year disappoint. Iowa State was a great example of overachieving last season, and somebody else will be this season's version of that. They'll show themselves in the coming weeks and months. But I don't want to say it's impossible to know who it's going to be, but it's very difficult. I give you some candidates, but it's very difficult. So I never speak in absolutes about this stuff. Like, there's no way Memphis could go to a Final Four, or there's no way Memphis will make the NCAA tournament, because there's always a way these things can happen. But I would, if I were betting, I would bet Memphis is a slightly inferior team this season than the best version of Memphis was last season. Obviously, this team, you hope, is better than the team that went through the losing streaks and really put itself on the wrong side of the NCAA tournament projected bracket for a while, until until this player got hurt, that player left the program, and addition by subtraction happened, and Memphis got better. But this team doesn't have the same type of talent. It's just, I think this is inarguable, a less talented roster. But I can tell you that the coaching staff feels good about it. They know that they don't have a lottery pick on this team. They know that they have Kendrick Davis, DeAndre Williams, and then a lot of, we'll see. But one of the things this team has working for it that previous teams didn't, certainly last season's team didn't, is that everybody knows who the best player is. I had somebody close to that program tell me, right now, the good thing we got going for us is that everybody knows who our best player is, whereas last year maybe 6 guys thought they were the best player, and last season they had 13 guys who thought they should be starters, and this season that number's a little lower. It's more manageable. It's gonna, never say never, but I'd be surprised if this team encounters the chemistry problems that last season's team did. So I think the floor is higher, but the ceiling is lower. But they got a 9 seed last season because they did so much damage early that, as good as they got late, they still could only muster a 9 seed. They should be in that range, of seeding again. And then it just comes down to matchups in the NCAA tournament. You don't have to be one of the best 16 teams in the country to make the Sweet 16. You don't have to be one of the best 8 teams in the country to make the Elite 8. You don't have to be one of the best 4 teams in the country to make the Final Four. You have to get into the bracket, hopefully have a favorable matchup, and then perform in a single elimination tournament. And often, you see somebody make the Sweet 16. It's like, oh, wow, how'd they get to the Sweet 16? Well, they beat a comparable team in the first round. So, because if you're a 9 seed, you're playing a comparable team in the first round. And then, let's say they're a 9 seed again. This doesn't often happen. In fact, it's only happened once. But you win your 8-9 game, and then those 16 upsets the 1. Now you're playing a 16 seed to go to the Sweet 16. The more likely scenario is something like you're a 12 seed. You upset the 5 seed, and then the school you're supposed to be playing in the next round, the 4 seed, gets upset, and now you're playing a double-digit seed to get to the Sweet 16. So I never get caught up in this team has to go to the round of 32 or has to go to the Elite 8. It has to have a great season to get itself safely on the right side of the bubble, and then we'll see how it goes. I guess maybe this would be the best way to put it. I don't think this Memphis team will be as good as last season's Memphis team. I don't think it's as talented, but it could go further in the NCAA tournament based on nothing more than it might not have to play Gonzaga in the round of 32.
Both the AP top 25 and the coaches poll have North Carolina ranked number 1 and Gonzaga number 2 in their preseason polls. But in the top 25 and 1, you have those teams reverse. What led you to that decision?
I spent part of this offseason with North Carolina at number 1. I ultimately changed when 2 things happened. Gonzaga got Rusher Bolton back, who's a double-digit scorer on last season's team. He had indicated toward the end of last season, his father flat out said he was done with college, not coming back. And then at some point, he decided to come back to school. Another example, flawed NBA. I would even consider him a flawed NBA prospect. I would consider him not an NBA prospect at all. And so, again, in a different time, you just get on with your, hey, I've graduated college. There's nothing else for me to do here. It's time to go make some money playing basketball. Now you can make money playing college basketball. And I'm sure he is. And he's back in school. So they got him back. So that's like, getting back a double-digit score that you thought was out the door. And then they added a young man named Malachi Smith, who played at Chattanooga last season and was the Southern Conference Player of the Year. And he's a combo guard with size, somebody who's going to be able to step into Gonzaga's rotation and I think play either guard spot right from the jump. And you combine that with Drew Timme back, they bring back a couple of former top 50 recruits who are going to have, they had, whatever freshman seasons, but could be able to make a jump into this sophomore season. And I just think, keep it simple, Mark Few and Gonzaga, they've got the best roster in the country. Now, this is a team, people like to bang on them because they haven't won a national championship yet, as if that's a fair bar to set for a West Coast Conference, very small private school. I mean, it's amazing that this has been built into what it's been built into. But they're going to get one eventually. They finished first at KenPom, so first in a prominent computer ranking each of the past 2 years. They've been the overall number one seed in the NCAA tournament each of the past 2 years. They have beaten, schools like Kansas and Iowa and, you name, the idea that they just beat up on West Coast Conference schools is just not rooted in reality. So I don't have any real issue. Anybody having North Carolina ahead of Gonzaga. I think at this point you could have reasonably Gonzaga, North Carolina, Houston, or Kentucky ranked number one. I'd stop right there. I think it's got to be one of those four teams, but any of those four teams makes sense to me.
Talking about Houston, they have, veteran team returning this year. They added 5-star freshman, Jarace Walker, to their lineup. And, Kentucky has CBS Sports National Player of the Year and Naismith Award winner Oscar Tshiebwe back for the second season, and, with also a top 5 recruiting class. Pretty much in all the polls, they're ranked, 3rd and 4th respectively, including what you have. And Houston made the Elite 8 last year, I believe the Final 4 the year before. And Kentucky obviously had a disappointing end of the season, losing to, St. Peter's in overtime as a number 2 seed. Obviously, from what you just said, you expect that they should be able to compete with Gonzaga and North Carolina, don't you?
I do. Listen, John Calipari is under a lot of pressure heading into this season because 2 years ago they had the worst season in modern Kentucky history. And then they backed it with, first round loss to St. Peter's. That is not the type of thing you can do at Kentucky. So he's under a lot of pressure to have a bounce back season. They haven't won a championship since 2012. They haven't been to a Final Four since 2015. Villanova won 2 titles since Kentucky won its last. Bill Self is now a multi-time national championship coach. John Calipari is still stuck on one. He needs a great season, and I think he's going to have it. He brings back one of the best point guards in the country in Xavier Wheeler, the best big in the country in Oscar Tshiebwe, adds 2 likely one-and-done lottery picks in Kasem Wallace and Chris Livingston. They lost Keon Brooks, who was a starter, but they'll get more athletic with Jacob Toppin. They added a couple of shooters via the transfer portal to make sure that, they're able to space the floor and give Tshiebwe enough space to dominate around the rim. It's just a well-constructed college basketball team that checks basically every box. They've got experience. They've got legitimate NBA talent. They've got shooting. They've got a rock solid point guard. They're not my pick to win the national championship, but on paper, they're good enough to do it. And for whatever it's worth, they are preseason number 1 at KenPom. Again, that's just an algorithm, but it's a pretty good indicator of who's going to be good and who isn't. And KenPom.com at least believes nobody's going to be better than Kentucky. If you're a John Calipari hater, and I know there's a lot of them in Memphis for whatever reason, you better have gotten your jokes off, when they lost to St. Peter's, or the year when they struggled and lost to nearly everybody, because I would expect the Wildcats are operating either at or near the top of the sport this season.
Legendary Coach K retires. Assistant John Shire steps in as the new head coach at Duke and has a top-ranked recruiting class in the nation. How good can this mostly young team be this year?
It can be good, but it is incredibly young. They bring back Jeremy Roach, and that's it. I mean, everything else is, freshmen. And though John Calipari and Mike Krzyzewski in certain times have made it look easy coaching teams that young, it's not easy. Ask Penny Hardaway. Ask, there are plenty of coaches who have enrolled heralded recruiting classes, and they don't turn into great college basketball teams. Roster balance is very important in this sport. I would never turn down a 5-star prospect, a high school, All-American who's going to be a college freshman, but literally nobody has ever won with a team as young, won it all with a team as young as this Duke team is going to be. People think of that Kentucky 2012 team that had Anthony Davis and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and Marcus Teague as an example of a group of one and dones who won a national title. And they were young. They had 3 freshman starters, but 3 of the top 6 scorers on that team were non-freshmen. They had older guys too. If you take Kentucky's 6 most important players from that team, 3 of them were not freshmen. They were returning players. And if you look at Duke in 2015, similarly, they had Jalil Okafor, Justice Winslow, Tyus Jones, one and done freshmen, but 3 of the top 6 players were not freshmen. They were returning players. And so what history tells us is if you're going to try to win a national championship with first-year players being your stars, you need to surround them with non-freshmen, older guys. And the truth is Duke doesn't really have that. They've got the 5-star freshmen, but they don't have the supplemental role players who have been in the program multiple years. They got one of those guys, but history tells us you probably need 3 of those guys at least. So I think Duke's going to be good. Top 10 team in the preseason. Derek Lively is, the number 1 high school player in the class of 2022. He's a rim protecting 7'1" center. Like everybody in Memphis knows how good Jalen Duren was. If you watched Jalen Duren and Derek Lively play on the grassroots circuit a couple summers ago, because they played together, they were on the same team. I thought all along Lively was the better player and the better prospect. And so I expect him to have even a bigger impact than Jalen Duren had at Memphis, and Duren was great at Memphis. But when you combine a first-year coach, and I'm a believer in John Shire, he set himself up to succeed. I think they'll be good, but will they be a legitimate national championship contender at the end? Based on the roster construction alone, history says probably not, but possibly, first time for everything.
Out of the rest of the top 10, your top 10, who else do you think has maybe a good shot of making the Final Four this year?
Well, my Final 4 picks, actually had to turn them in earlier today, would be Gonzaga, Houston, North Carolina, and Kentucky. But I tell you, Baylor's going to be really good again. Tennessee is going to be really good again. Tennessee won the SEC tournament, got a 3 seed. I thought, based on resume, should have been a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they bring 4 their top 5 players back from that team. They lose Kennedy Chandler, but they bring all the other important pieces back. So, they're going to be good again. Auburn's going to be good again. They lost Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, but they bring back 3 guards, and they got one of the best transfers in Johnny Broome from Morehead State. They enrolled a 5-star big in Johan Traore. So that's not, the same as having Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, but I still think Auburn has a legitimate chance to win back-to-back SEC titles for the first time in school history. And then, sticking in the SEC, Arkansas is going to be great. At least on paper, looks that way. It's a team that, has been to back-to-back Elite Eights, lost everybody off last season's team except for Devontae Davis, but Muss went out and really, really killed it, via the transfer portal and the traditional recruiting pass. Enrolled 3 McDonald's All-Americans, 5-star prospects, and also I believe enrolled at least 5 players you can call, impactful transfers, guys who have averaged double digits at other schools. So there's a place where I wish they would have got another guy or 2 back from last season's team, but there's enough talent and a pretty nice blend of 18-year-olds and 22-year-olds that I think they've got a shot to not only make the Elite Eight for the 3rd straight year, but maybe punch it all the way to the Final Four for the first time since 1995.
So prediction time, you just gave us your, Final Four that's going to be played at NRG Stadium in Houston, which I believe is going to be your colleague, CBS Sports, Jim Nance's, last Final Four that he's going to do. Who do you think is going to cut down the nets on April 3rd of 2023?
I'll go Gonzaga. Now, it should be noted, I have said this each of the past 2 preseasons. And the problem is, so you say Gonzaga is going to win the national title, and then Gonzaga doesn't win the national title, and people go, you idiot, you thought it was going to be Gonzaga and it wasn't Gonzaga. It's always more likely that it's going to be somebody other than the team you pick, regardless of what team you pick. North Carolina, Gonzaga, Houston, depending on the betting market you're looking at, are considered the favorites to win the national championship. Those 3 schools. There was a time where Gonzaga and Houston were co-favorites. There's I saw recently North Carolina was the betting favorite in another betting market, but those are all reasonable answers to the question, who's going to win the 2023 NCAA tournament. But if somebody were to offer you right now, Gonzaga or the field, take the field. Houston or the field, take the field. North Carolina or the field, take the field. How about this? Gonzaga and Houston or the field, probably still take the field. Sometimes the best team does win the national championship, but many times it doesn't. If you go back and look at the KenPom ratings from last season, Kansas finished 3rd at KenPom, but won the national title. Year before that, Baylor finished 2nd at KenPom, but won the national title. Go back to 2019, Virginia finished 1st at KenPom and won the national title. So there's one where it worked out. Go back to 2018, Villanova won the national championship and finished 1st at KenPom. So there is, and I don't mean that KenPom's the end all be all, but it is, if you want to have a really great idea about if you put team A and team B on a neutral court, who would be favored in that game, that is what KenPom represents. And so you go to the past 4 NCAA tournaments. I just gave you 2 examples where the best team didn't win it. And I gave you 2 examples where the best team did win it. And that's more or less how it breaks down. But you're always better off taking the field over any one team because of the nature of the event. It's not a series of best of 7 matchups or best of 5 matchups or best of 3 matchups. It is a single elimination tournament with 68 teams, 40-minute games, short 3-point line, foul trouble, pulled hamstring, any number of things could, dictate the outcome of a game. For instance, if you were to take Arkansas and Gonzaga last season and put them in a 7-game series, I think Gonzaga wins that probably in 5 games, maybe 6. But Gonzaga would be favored, and I think Gonzaga will win it. But the nature of the tournament, they only play once. And, coaches will tell you this all the time. We don't have to beat them 7 times. We just have to beat them today. That's, and I don't subscribe to the cliche, anything can happen. Anybody can beat anybody, because anybody can't beat anybody. But in that tournament, certainly once you get to the Sweet 16, anybody can beat anybody. And you don't have to Like I remember Tom Izzo telling this story. In advance of a national championship game against North Carolina. It was Michigan State, North Carolina, whatever year. They all run together for me at this point. But I remember vividly talking to Tom day before the national championship game. And it's North Carolina, Michigan State. I want to say maybe it was 2009. Let me see if I can confirm that real quick. Yeah, that looks right. So it's April 5th on Sunday. I'm talking to Tom Izzo, and he said, here's the truth. Like, we're not as good as them. We're just not. Like, you know it. I know it. And if this were a 5-game series or a 7-game series, we'd have no chance because we can't beat those guys that many times. 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7. We could not do that. He said, but here's the deal. If we play really well and we can get them to not play really well, then we only have to do that for 40 minutes for 2 halves. And if we can do that, then maybe we have a shot. He said, look, they probably got a better coach than we got. He was being self-deprecating at this point. They probably got a better coach than we got. They probably, they got better players than we got, and they are a better team than we have. But, we just got to do it for 40 minutes. So we'll see. Now, fast forward to the next night, Carolina blew them out, 89-72, just wiped them off the floor. But his point is an important point. Obviously, if that North Carolina team with Tyler Hansbrough and Ty Lawson and Wayne Ellington, and Danny Green, and Deion Thompson and Ed Davis and Larry Drew, if that team was going to play Michigan State in the best of 7 series, forget about it. We're only debating whether it's 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, 7 games, North Carolina. But given the nature of the event, you can get a Michigan State over North Carolina. And so that's a long way of saying my pick is Gonzaga. But once you get to the Sweet 16, and they're there basically every year, you are in 40-minute games of a single elimination tournament, usually against, if not a comparable opponent, certainly somebody who is good enough to beat you. I don't care how good you are. If a college basketball team goes out and throws, 13 of 27 from 3 on you, you're going to have a hard time that night. And that's the type of thing that happens in the NCAA tournament all the time. So give me the field over any one team, but if forced to pick just one team, I'll ride the Zags. And I really do root for them, if only because I get so tired of hearing people say they can't do it. You get people using those types of words all the time that I just totally disagree with. It's like, well, Gonzaga can't win a national title, or a West Coast Conference team can't win a national title. What do you mean can't? Of course they can't. They haven't. What you mean is they haven't done it. Like I have never hit a hole in one. I play golf, not well, but often. And I've never hit a hole in one. That doesn't mean I can't hit a hole in one. It just means I've never done it. I almost had one yesterday, if you don't mind me bragging. But I assume if I keep, firing balls at greens and flags over and over again, eventually one of them will drop. And perhaps apples to maybe orange, not the best analogy, but you get the point. If Mark Few keeps building teams that are good enough, that have a chance to win it, eventually he will win it. And this is just the latest example of a team that on paper is good enough to do it. And people should never forget, like Gonzaga has played in, 2 of the past 5 or 6 national championship games. Like the idea that, the idea that these guys haven't been close or quote can't do it, just crazy. They played in the 17 title game and the 21 title game. So they played in 2 of the past 5 national championship games. And the game against Carolina was tied with a couple of minutes to go. Right. If you replay that game from a moment with a couple of minutes to go 100 times, Carolina probably wins at 50. Gonzaga probably wins at 50, whatever, something like that. It's just, you only play it once, and it's just somebody makes a shot, somebody gets a stop, somebody gets a favorable call. Carolina's your national champion instead of Gonzaga. But that's how close they've been. They were good enough to do it that year. They've been good enough to do it in other years. And on paper, they look like they're good enough to do it this year. We'll see whether they can.
Gary, I know this is about to be a very super busy time for you, and you're going to be spending several days a week in New York. And it seems like every year your job gets bigger and bigger each year with CBS Sports, which was great in many ways, but probably wears you down a little bit too sometimes. And I really enjoyed having your wife Kelly on the show a few weeks ago. And even though I've never met your kids, between hearing you talk about them on the radio, between talking to you about them back in June, between hearing her talk about them, I feel like I know them.
Yeah.
You got a beautiful family that loves you, and I know you love them very much. And I really appreciate you coming on today. I look forward to reading your columns, listening to your show, listening to your podcast, and following you on television. So it's going to be a great college season.
It's really nice of you to say all that. It's not lost on me how lucky I am, both from the perspective of having, these opportunities with CBS Sports. Like, I get exhausted, overwhelmed, frustrated even sometimes? Of course I do, like anybody else. But it is never lost on me that, I'm a public school kid from Mississippi. And, they fly me to New York and put me up in a nice hotel and then put me on television to talk. That's wild to me. And it's still wild to me. I don't take it for granted, and I don't just assume it'll always be there. So even in those moments where I feel completely mentally overwhelmed, or in some cases physically overwhelmed, just because there's a lot going on and I'm involved in so many things. Like I don't think anybody else in media does all the things that I do. I've thought about this a bunch. I cannot name another person in media who hosts a radio show 5 days a week, totally separate national podcast at least 3 days a week, does studio work, does sideline reporting, writes, and also host various television shows that have nothing to do with traditional studio work. Like, that's a lot to do. But man, it's a dream to get to do it all. Even if, sometimes you can get overwhelmed and frustrated and perhaps grouchy. And then, like the family stuff is, I mean, I couldn't be luckier. Again, it doesn't mean that sometimes my kids don't drive me crazy or vice versa. And it doesn't mean that, my marriage or anybody else's marriage is perfect, but I'm lucky to have all of the things that I have. And I really enjoyed, watching Kelly, speak on your podcast. She was terrific.
Yeah.
She kept an eye on the podcast views to point out at one point that more people had watched her than watched me. So I got knocked down a few pegs in my own home after that, but she was great. And the feedback that she got from that and that I got from that was really nice. So I appreciated you being interested in her and being interested in her for what she is, which is an incredible mother and successful business owner. Sometimes people, certainly, once my career started to head another direction, and in a positive way, she would often, or sometimes at least, get identified, hey, that's Gary Parrish's wife, and I love that, that you didn't want to talk to her because she was Gary Parrish's wife. You wanted to talk to her because she's Kelly Parrish, a successful business owner who, has some pretty incredible stories to tell herself. And, sometimes people will ask me about the store, like, oh, so you guys own Aiden Ollie. I mean, I think technically I'm an owner of it, I guess, but like, that's her store. That's her idea. She made it happen. She runs it. Every once in a while I drop by, to go to lunch or something, but I really have nothing to do with that store other than I'm married. I'm lucky enough to be married to the person who owns it and runs it. And so for you to give her a platform to just tell her story and talk about, all the things you guys talked about, that I enjoyed that, and I appreciated you doing it.
That was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun to have her on. So I appreciate you asking her and that setting this up to get to do that, because great stories.
Yeah. She was terrific. And I'm imagining she'll be in demand going forward for other people's podcast, and then maybe I can retire someday.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time again today. Hopefully I can have you on again after the season's over and we can talk about it and recap it.
Look forward to it, Mike. It's always good to talk to you, man.
You too, Gary. Take care.